When Jesus Christ was on earth, he had tens of thousands of fans. And out of those, he had hundreds of faithful followers, people that chased him from town to town, tuning in every time he gave a speech or a sermon. And out of those hundreds of followers, he had dozens that he actually commissioned to do miraculous work. 72, in fact, that he sent out to do miracles. They cast out demons, they healed people with a touch. And out of those 72, there was a group of 12, the 12 apostles that were the closest of any of them, that they followed Jesus everywhere. They were given more responsibility than anyone else. And out of those 12, there was an inner circle of three that were as close as Jesus to anyone. That he brought them on trips and adventures that no one else got to experience. And out of those three, there was one named Simon Peter, who was given a preeminent position amongst all of the followers, the apostles, the miracle doers of Jesus. He was an important guy. So important, you might not realize this, Peter wasn't a name until Simon Peter, until Jesus gave him that nickname. We take it for granted that it's a normal name now. It's only a normal name because of this guy and because of the nickname that Jesus gave him. Not only that, even today, the Catholic Church bases all of its claims of authority for the Pope on the fact that he has the legacy and he has inherited the mantle of Simon Peter. So both at the time of Jesus and even now, Simon Peter is one of the most pivotal people in history, not just of the faith. And yet, at the same time, I think he is one of the most misunderstood characters in the Bible. So much attention is put on what he did and the position he had, and not enough attention is paid to who he was. In fact, I'll tell you, I watch a lot of Jesus movies and Jesus TV shows, and I'm always disappointed in the way they represent Simon Peter. I don't think anyone's ever really gotten him right. Until recently, there's a TV show that's out right now. It's called The Chosen, and it's free. You can watch it just by downloading the app. You don't have to subscribe to anything. And I had a couple of members just really recommend it to me, and I'm so jaded at this point. I've seen so many Jesus things. I didn't want to watch it, but finally enough people told me that it was good and I needed to check it out that I did, and I'm so glad I did, because I'll tell you this now, it is the first accurate portrayal of Simon Peter I've ever seen. So as I spend the next 30 minutes or so giving you kind of the highlights of Simon Peter's life, if this at all piques your interest, I strongly recommend you check out The Chosen. You're going to get a glimpse and understanding of who the man really was in a way that very few people have gotten right. But part of the reason why I think Peter is so misunderstood and why it's important for us to dive into him today is because so many of the stories that are told about him are a little ambiguous. As you read them, you're not entirely sure what lesson you're meant to draw from them. The Bible doesn't really spell out what's going on. So today I just want to kind of go through an overview of Peter's life from the very beginning when Jesus first called him to the end. And let's paint as much of a picture as we can in summary of who this man was and why he matters in our series Broken Heroes today. So we start at the beginning. This is early on in Jesus' ministry. And so one day as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, which is another name for the Sea of Galilee, which is kind of famous in the Bible, the people were crowding around him and they were listening to the word of God. And he saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who'd been fishing all night and now they were just cleaning up, washing their nets. And he got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, who would be given the nickname Peter later on, and he asked him to put out a little bit from shore. Then Jesus sat down and he actually taught the people from the boat. And when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we've worked hard all night. We haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down the nets." And when they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. And so they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and they filled both boats so full that they began to sink. And when Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and he said, "Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man." For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners, the ones in the other boat. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people." And so they pulled their boats up on shore, they left everything, and they followed Jesus. And here it is. This is the moment. The moment where a fisherman who would have labored in obscurity his whole life, no one would have remembered him beyond a generation. This is the moment where he left everything, followed Jesus, and became one of the most significant people in human history. And even as we read this story, there are a couple of things to draw from it. On the one hand, even though it's this impulsive gesture, he just on a word left everything and followed Jesus. And you think, well, maybe that's just a great sign of his faith. That right away, he didn't need to hem and haw, he didn't need to hedge his bets. When he was confronted with this miraculous catch where he knew that he was seeing someone special in the person of Jesus, he didn't need to think about it, he just committed. And it's this impulsive gesture of brave faith. On the other hand, this story doesn't tell you this, but I'll let you know, Peter's a married man at the time. He has a wife. Now, I don't know about your family setup, but if I, without any warning, explanation, planning, told my wife that I had left the one lucrative career I had training for and was going to just follow an itinerant speaker for the next 3 years, that would not go over well in my house. I mean, the Bible doesn't say, but I get the impression he didn't even ask Jesus if he offered health insurance. Didn't even come up. Right, so already we get a picture of who this man is. He's an impulsive man, he acts quickly, but even in this moment, is this an act of faith that we should learn from and model and follow? Or does this show that he's a little rash, that he does things without thinking about their consequences or their impact on other people? And as he follows Jesus for the next 3 years, we're gonna see this same motif repeat over and over again in the stories. In fact, a few months later, Jesus had done this amazing miracle. He fed a crowd of over 5,000 people with just a handful of loaves of bread and fish. And immediately following that miracle, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. And after he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. And later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. And shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the surface of the water. And when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," Jesus said. So immediately Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" Major moment in Peter's life. But again, what is the lesson here? On the one hand, he's the only one brave enough to see Jesus doing this miraculous thing and to think that maybe there's a chance he could do it too. And he calls out, "Let me do it." And he walks on water, even if it's just for a few steps. That's more than anyone else who isn't God has ever done. But notice, he doesn't really get praised by Jesus. Jesus doesn't say to him in this moment, "Dude, great job. You walked on water for a few seconds." It's like training wheels. "We'll get there, buddy." Jesus says to him, "You have little faith. Why did you doubt?" Like he gets rebuked. And again, you see this picture of a guy that leaps before he thinks, that jumps into the water, doesn't think about it, and on the one hand does an amazing act of faith, but on the other hand also has his doubt exposed in a way that the other ones didn't. So what are we to make of this story other than, again, Peter's a rash guy who jumps before he thinks? And it's not just actions. And in fact, throughout his ministry, Peter said dumb stuff all the time. You just know that you didn't think about that. You just kind of spat out the first thing that came out of your mouth. In fact, there's one great example of this. This is now towards the end of Jesus' ministry. And so after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John. So that's that inner circle of three that are even more than privileged than the 12. He took those three with him. He led them up on a high mountain where they were all alone. And there, Jesus was transfigured before them. What does that mean? His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. And there appeared before them Elijah and Moses, two patriarchs of the faith who'd been dead for 1,000 years. And they were there talking with Jesus. And Peter knows what to do. Peter says to Jesus, "Rabbi, it's so good that we're here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." And Mark helpfully explains, he didn't know what he was saying. They were just so frightened. And I love this moment. You've just been confronted by ghosts. Jesus looks like some sort of supernatural entity, right? He's glowing. Any rational person shuts up and hope they don't die. That's what you do in that moment. You just cower in fear and you just go, I don't know what's happening. I just hope that it moves on quickly. And Peter's the only one who thinks, I know, the ghosts are gonna need a tent. That's why you brought us, Jesus, I get it. And again, it's this moment where this guy, he speaks before he thinks. And again, he's in these privileged spots. He has opportunities to do great things. But you just kind of left scratching your head going, what are you thinking, man? And would it ever be worth once in a while just stop and count to 10 before you say the first thing that comes to mind? But it also led to some beautiful and powerful moments as well. These are the last days before Jesus' death. And Jesus, he came to the region of Caesarea Philippi. He knows he's getting close to the end. And so he asked his disciples, hey, who's everybody saying that I am? The Son of Man, that's his nickname. Who's everyone saying I am? And the disciples replied, well, some say that you're John the Baptist, because he'd just been killed, and maybe Jesus was like a resurrected version of John the Baptist. Others say you're Elijah. Still others say that you're Jeremiah or one of the other prophets. Well, what about you, Jesus asked? Who do you say I am? And true to form, without thought, Simon Peter just immediately answered, well, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. You got the answer right, Peter. And I tell you now that you are Peter. This is the moment of revealing the reason for the nickname. Peter's not a real name at that time. It just meant rock. And so he said, I'm telling you that you are rocky. And on this rock, I will build my church. And I want to pause here again and help you think about this right. Peter's such a normal name for us. I would have no problem following or trusting a boss named Peter. How many of you would trust and follow someone named Rocky? I don't know about you, I only know one person named Rocky. I only ever heard of one. And if I needed to punch out an evil communist, he's the first one I would turn to. To start a movement of faith, I don't know if Rocky is the guy. And yet Jesus has started this thing. He says, no, you're Rocky, man, and on this rock, I'm gonna build my church. The gates of Hades will not overcome it. Not only that, Jesus says, I'm gonna give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, Rocky. And whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And right here, guys, I hope you're thinking like I am, bad idea, Jesus. You don't want to bind heaven to whatever Rocky happens to think to say next. He says dumb stuff all the time, and you don't want to have to back that up. And yet, that's what Jesus does. But even in this moment of amazing faith where Rocky says, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God, I'm not showing you the rest of it, but the story continues where he then says something dumb immediately next, and Jesus rebukes him and calls him Satan. He says, get behind me, Satan, because he just says all these different things. He is a man of impulsivity, a man who acts and speaks before he thinks. And so far, it's been ambiguous. There's been these interesting moments where on the one hand, he walks on water, and on the other hand, he sinks. And on the one hand, he declares that Jesus is the Son of God. On the other hand, Jesus says that he says something that's the words of Satan. And it's kind of both and you're just not really sure how to read it. But it's all gonna culminate in this one terrible moment. The evening that Jesus Christ is gonna be tortured, crucified to death. And on this evening, Jesus has a really serious conversation with his disciples, especially with Rocky. So Jesus told the 12, this very night, you will all fall away on account of me. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have risen from the dead, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. And Rocky replied, even if everyone else falls away on account of you, I never will. Truly, I tell you, Jesus answered, this very night, before the rooster crows, you're gonna disown me 3 times. Now again, you'd think that someone who's seen Jesus' miracles, who's watched him predict the future correctly many times, you'd think this would be a moment of a little bit of a self-check, a pause. Think about what you're gonna say, Peter. But nope, Peter immediately declares, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. And all the other disciples said the same. So no check, no thoughtfulness, no thinking, hey, Jesus is maybe trying to warn me about something big, and I haven't known Jesus to be wrong. I should maybe take this seriously. Nope, it's the same Peter it always is, the guy that just boldly declares something and doesn't really think a little extra the way you would want him to. And so sure enough, later on that evening, when Jesus had finished praying, he left with his disciples, 11 of the 12. We'll see what happened to Judas in a second. And he crossed the Kidron Valley, and on the other side there was a garden, the Garden of Gethsemane, and he and his disciples went into it. Now Judas, the 12th disciple, the one who betrayed Jesus, he knew the place because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. And so Judas came to the garden, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees, and they were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. And then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it, and he struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. But Jesus immediately rebuked Peter. Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me? This is what I planned to do the whole time, Peter. And in fact, Jesus went on to say, no more of this. And he touched Malchus's ear and he healed him. Jesus actually did a miracle for the sake of undoing Peter's rash action. The point here is this, that Peter thinks he's doing a great thing. He's defending Jesus. He's defending his Lord. And Jesus saying, no. And in fact, he's using his divine power to undo what Peter is doing without thought. And so then, sure enough, the guards arrest Jesus. They drag him off for a mock trial, and all of the apostles scatter, the 11 remaining, except for 2. John and Peter, they don't scatter. They don't run away. They follow Jesus. They sneak into the compound where he's being put on this mock trial. And John has a connection, some sort of family connection. He's allowed inside the building, and so he gets to witness the fake trial and all the things that they make up, the ways that they persecute Jesus directly. Peter doesn't have the same kind of connection, so he's stuck kind of loitering out in the courtyard, and that's when this happens. Now, Peter was sitting out in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him. You also were with Jesus of Galilee, she said, but he denied it before them all. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. Then he went out to the gateway where another servant girl saw him and said to the people there, this fellow is with Jesus of Nazareth. He denied it again with an oath. I don't know the man. And after a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and they said, surely you're one of them. Your accent gives you away. And then he began to call down curses, and he swore to them, I don't know the man. And immediately a rooster crowed. Then Peter remembered the words Jesus had spoken, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside, and he wept bitterly. So this is the moment we've been building towards this whole time. This is the moment of Peter's deepest shame. This moment where all of his reckless thoughts and actions and words had worked out okay. Like he'd walked on water for a little bit. He'd professed who Jesus was. He'd become the leader of the disciples. And it all culminates in this moment where his thoughtlessness betrays him, where his brash claim that, oh no, I'll die with you. I'll never disown you. I'll never deny you. Certainly not 3 times. And here it is. It happens within hours, just as Jesus predicted. And now that we've gotten here, I want to take a moment and talk about one of the ways I think Peter is so misunderstood. You see, every time I've heard this story preached, it's always been with a lesson that we should be brave. That unlike Peter, who in cowardice and fear denied Jesus 3 times, and so foolishly after he just promised he wouldn't, that he gave in to his fears. He in a moment of cowardice, he denied Jesus. And we should be bold witnesses to the world. We should never disown Jesus. We should always be confident that he is with us. That's the lesson that had always been taught to me about this story. But as I hope you've seen from the stories that we've put together, that doesn't make sense. That's not Peter. Peter has a lot of faults, but acting out of fear and cowardice is not one of them. This is the guy who jumps out of a boat in the middle of a storm. This is a guy who an hour earlier had tried to cut off a guy's ear. Guys, they were surrounded. They were outnumbered. They had 2 swords between the apostles. They had lots of swords and weapons among the dozens of soldiers that were there to arrest Jesus. And that didn't stop Peter from valiantly being willing to fight to the death. Maybe he gets to cut one guy's ear off. The rest of them are going to kill him. It wasn't cowardice or fear that drove Peter to be there that night. If it was, he could have ran away with the rest of the other apostles. This is what clearly was going on. Peter was trying to put together a rescue mission for Jesus. There's no other explanation that makes sense. The reason he and John are there, John's on the inside getting the intel. Peter's there with his sword, waiting for the opportune moment to bust Jesus out, waiting for John to give him the signal, hey, this is where the guards aren't paying attention. We're gonna grab Jesus and we're gonna book it out of here. And now you can see how he so foolishly denied, didn't believe Jesus when he predicted that he would betray him. Because if the question is, would Peter betray Jesus out of fear and cowardice? The answer is never. But in a moment where Peter is doing some sort of spy rescue scene where he's incognito waiting for the moment to pull his sword and bust Jesus out, yeah, he'll deny him as part of his subterfuge. Yeah, he's not ready yet. This isn't time. John hasn't given him the signal. And so when people ask him if he's with Jesus, the answer is, oh, no, because not out of fear, but out of waiting for the moment that he could finally do this rash act and rescue Jesus from torture and death. And this is where we need to be really clear about this. This is actually worse than cowardice and fear. See, in this moment, Peter's recklessness is attempting to undo the work and plan of God. See, Jesus has told him for months, he said, Peter, I'm going to Jerusalem to die. Peter, they're gonna put me to death. Peter, it's okay, this is God's plan. I'm gonna die, but I'm gonna rise again. You saw it. He said, I will rise again, but trust me, this is what has to happen. And what you see is Peter thoughtlessly, recklessly saying, not on my watch, Jesus. I'm never gonna let him put you to death. Even if I have to sneak in and storm the gates of the high priest himself, I won't let your plan happen. And if Peter's plan had worked out, think of how much more tragic it would have been, because it's not just a moment of fear and him just giving up in cowardice. This is a moment where Peter is attempting to subvert the will of God. See, Peter wasn't a coward. It was much worse than this. Peter was reckless. Recklessness is just this, anytime you're taking action without thought for the consequences. And as you see this is so clearly consistent with who Peter has been from the beginning to this moment now. This is a man who takes action without thinking about the consequences. And in this case, the consequences are severe. If Jesus doesn't do his plan, humanity doesn't get saved. But in his own impulsivity, in his own rashness, Peter doesn't care about any of that. He just knows that he needs to rescue the man that he loves and serves so faithfully. Consequences be damned, which they would have been. See, the recklessness of Peter is the real problem here, and we need to see that's his personality, that's who he is. But even more than that, even more worrisome than the recklessness of Peter, because that's consistent, that's who he's always been and who he's always going to be. I'm concerned about the recklessness of Jesus in this moment. Now that you've gotten to see who Peter was, what in the world was Jesus thinking? Why would you pick this guy? Why would you make Rocky the one that you're gonna build the future of the church around? The guy who acts before he thinks, the guy who speaks without knowing what he's saying, the guy that's going to attempt to derail God's plan of salvation. Jesus, what are you doing? It's the most reckless thing possible to entrust the future of salvation to this guy. And broaden it, why would Jesus use any of us? Why would he use me to advance his kingdom? Why would he use you? Every one of us, whether it's recklessness or something else, we've got something wrong with us, something that's going to keep us from the plan God would have from us. Isn't it reckless of God to let human beings be responsible for the advancement of his kingdom? What's going on there? And so this is what we need to grapple with this story. This isn't a moment where we just kind of casually say, oh, we should be bold for our faith and move on. This is where we have to grapple with Peter's recklessness and God's. What is God doing? But what you'll see as the story continues is what he's doing is he's conquering death. He's allowing himself to be killed so that he can rise again, so that death no longer has a hold on anyone who follows Jesus. Let alone Peter keeping his eyes on Jesus and walking on water, we can keep our eyes on Jesus and know that death has lost its sting, that there is no victory anymore for sin, death, and the devil. See, there's this amazing truth that Jesus had planned it all out. In fact, there's this moment that's coming. This is now a few days after Jesus' resurrection. And now he's risen from the dead. He's appeared to a few people. And then there's this beautiful almost random little scene between Jesus and some of the disciples. It says, afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples after his resurrection by the Sea of Galilee, and it happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, that's James and John, and 2 other disciples were together. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them, and they said, we'll go with you. So they went out, they got into the boat, but all that night they caught nothing. And early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore. But the disciples didn't realize that it was Jesus from afar. And he called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? No, they answered. He said, throw your net on the right side of the boat and you will find some. And when they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. And then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it's the Lord. Recognize this moment. And as soon as Simon Peter heard him say it is the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and he jumped into the water and splashed ashore. Classic Peter. And what would follow was Jesus saying to Peter 3 times, Peter, do you love me? Peter saying, of course I do, Lord. And Jesus, in this moment of compassion and power, took the 3 times that Peter denied him and matched them out with 3 affirmations of Peter recommitting himself to the Lord. And Jesus restored him and entrusted him with a commission to feed his sheep, to launch the movement of Jesus's church, to be the rock that would start everything going. And I hope you see what I see here is the care and the thoughtfulness and the planning that Jesus put into this moment. See that opening scene where Jesus does a miracle and Peter just impulsively leaves the boats behind and follows him. It maybe was impulsive and thoughtless on Peter's part, but it was anything but on Jesus. See, Jesus had known that moment was going to happen. Jesus had known that Peter was going to deny him. Jesus knew that he was going to restore Peter in this beautiful, amazing way. And so he bookended his interactions with Peter with this powerful miracle on the front end and the back end so that Peter would see God's intentionality, his plan. See, Jesus always knew who Peter was, knew what kind of man he was. He wasn't caught by surprise by any of it, but he still had an intention that he was going to use this broken, flawed, reckless man in a powerful way. And he orchestrated all of the events of Peter's life to bring him to this moment where even his impetuousness could be redeemed. And in fact, we see this, that this landed on Peter in an amazing way because he was one of the leaders of the early church. He wrote some letters that we still have to this day. And Peter, in one of his letters, he wrote this amazing sentence. He said to all of the other early Christians, the people that were struggling, they were hurting, life was not going the way they thought it was supposed to. And he said to them, don't forget this one thing, dear friends. See, with the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. The Lord is not slow in keeping his promise, as some understand slowness. Instead, he is patient with you. He's not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance. And so even though the second coming hasn't happened yet, bear in mind that our Lord's patience means salvation for everyone, just as our dear brother Paul also wrote you with the wisdom that God gave him. And you see in this moment of Peter, someone who has learned the hard way, someone who has spent his life floundering like a fish out of water, jumping from one situation to the next, heedless of the consequences, and yet every time finding himself met with a God who is there to rescue him and set him back on the path. See, Peter was the kind of guy that would jump out of a boat, but he learned in that moment that Jesus' hand would always be there to pull him up. He lived through the death and resurrection of Jesus and learned from that Christ was not reckless, but that he was deliberate, patient, and intentional. And that every step of the journey was a step where God was doing something powerful, not just in Peter's life, but in the life of the whole world. See, Peter learned something powerful, that the opposite of recklessness is not meticulous planning. It's not anticipating 10 chess moves ahead of everyone else and knowing every possible pitfall or calamity that could happen so that you can prepare for it and plan for it. But actually, that there is a fine line between recklessness and faith. See, recklessness is just taking action without thought for the consequences, but faith is recognizing that God himself is in charge of the consequences and that we can take our actions with trust. That we don't have to have it figured out. We don't have to know what the next step is going to be. But if we act in the trust that God will work good out of it in the same way that Jesus could work good out of all of Peter's missteps and misstatements, then suddenly we've moved from recklessness into faith. And this is the calling, the message that I think God wants you to hear today, and not just today, this entire series that we've been in. That we're not called to try and figure everything out on our own. We're not called to fix every problem we have in ourselves. We're simply called to take one step at a time by faith, knowing that the consequences are in God's control, and that if we're just faithfully keeping our eyes on him, trying to do what he has put in front of us to do next, that he will take care of it in time. In fact, this is the picture of the broken heroes, that this faith is the defining universal characteristic of everyone that we've talked about so far in this series. In fact, I want to go to Hebrews 11. We didn't just pick these names out of a hat that we've been talking about for the last 2 months. See, Hebrews talks about faith. It says faith is a confidence in what we hope for, an assurance about what we don't see. It doesn't mean that we know all the consequences, we know all the plans, we know what's going to happen. It means that we have confidence, hope, and assurance that God does. And this faith is what the ancients were commended for. It's by faith that we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. It was by faith that Abraham, remember him, obeyed when God called him to leave home and go to another land that God would give him as inheritance. He went without knowing where he was going. He didn't know what the consequences were, but he went, not in recklessness, in faith, trusting that God wouldn't send him on a wild goose chase. It was by faith that even Sarah, remember her, was able to have a child even though she was barren and was too old. She believed that God would keep his promise. It was by faith that Jacob, when he was old and dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and bowed in worship as he leaned on his staff. It was by faith that Moses, when he grew up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to share the oppression of God's people instead of enjoying the fleeting pleasures of sin. He thought it was better to suffer for the sake of Christ than to own the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking ahead to his greater reward. How much more do I need to say? It would take too long to recount the stories of the faith of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and all the prophets. By faith, these people overthrew kingdoms. They ruled with justice. They received what God had promised them. They shut the mouths of lions. They quenched the flames of fire. They escaped death by the edge of the sword. Their weakness was turned to strength. They became strong in battle and put whole armies to flight. Women received their loved ones back again from death. But others were tortured, refusing to turn from God in order to be set free. They placed their hope in a better life after the resurrection. Some were jeered at and their backs were cut open with whips. Others were chained in prisons. Some died by stoning. Some were sawed in half. Others were killed with the sword. Some went about wearing skins of sheep and goats, destitute and oppressed and mistreated. They were too good for this world, wandering over deserts and mountains, hiding in caves and holes in the ground. But all of these people, the ones that had earthly success and celebration and those that earned earthly suffering and death, all of them earned a good reputation because of their faith. Yet none of them actually received during their life all that God had promised. None of them, even the successful ones. For God had something better in mind for us so that they would not reach perfection without you and me. See, God had something better in mind for us, and God has had that intention for us since the dawn of time. See, God's not reckless. He's patient and intentional. And every step of the way, in every one of these lives that we've studied over the last 9 weeks, every one of those people that was listed and summarized in Hebrews chapter 11, every one of them, God was faithfully, patiently, slowly moving. And that all culminates in a promise of something better for you and for me, just like what they have received themselves. And so here's the thing. I can't tell you what the rest of my life is going to look like. I hope that it'll be a life of moving from success to success, opportunities for celebration and growth. But maybe I'll have a life where I make missteps, where my path gets derailed, where I'm jeered at, mistreated. But what I can tell you is this: no matter which way it goes, both the successes and the sufferings will pale in comparison to the something better that God has in mind for me through Jesus Christ. that there is nothing on this earth that can keep me from the goodness that God intends for me. Not even anything inside me either. Even whatever's resonated with you in this series, whether it's mistrust or anger or cruelty or passivity or greed, whatever it is, there's nothing that God cannot redeem through Jesus Christ, not even something like Simon Peter's own recklessness. I mean, this might have been the most dangerous sin we've talked about the whole time, because Simon Peter is the only one who was arrogant enough to think he knew better than God's plan and to try to derail God's goodness. And yet even that was redeemed. Even his attempts could not undo God's patient, intentional plan for Peter, his patient, intentional plan for the salvation of humanity. And what I will tell you is this, that whatever lies ahead for you in your life, whether it's good things and celebrations, whether it's suffering and struggle, what I will tell you is this: God has never and will never be reckless with your life. That just like we see so clearly how patiently he was moving to bring good and redemption into Peter's life in spite of his own recklessness, he is moving patiently and intentionally in your life right now as we speak. I promise it. And he will bring you, he will bring me to that something better that he has been planning since the dawn of creation. Amen. So as I've gotten to share with you this morning, as you've gotten to receive and read God's word, I want to give you an opportunity to not just hear it and receive it, but to proclaim it yourselves. And so as we sing this next song, I want you to really focus on what it's saying. It's saying that from a human perspective, God's actions can sometimes look reckless because we are so limited in our perspective. That it doesn't make sense for a shepherd of 100 sheep to leave 99 of them for the sake of rescuing the one that is lost. That seems foolish. It's bad math. And yet that is the metaphor Jesus uses to convey that his love, although it seems reckless to us, is actually, it shows that the depths of his love will not be stopped. There is nothing that will keep him from rescuing even one sheep, from rescuing you, or rescuing me. So would you stand with me now and let us proclaim boldly the words of this song together.
Thanks so much for joining us today. Hopefully you were inspired in some way or learned something new. If you want to learn more about us, about what we do, about our church, feel free to visit pathfinderstl.org. You can find more information there. Finally, too, I want to let you know about something neat that we do. It's called the Pathfinder Message Podcast. So what I like to do is when I'm exercising or running or just doing chores, I listen to the Message Podcast just to remind me about what we talked about this weekend and kind of give me a little boost for the week. It helps. Finally, like, share, comment, subscribe, do all of the above. Help us out and expand our reach so that we can reach even more people with the message of Jesus Christ. Blessings to you in your week. Thanks for joining us.